Ever find yourself white-knuckling it on the highway? After seeing a truck, like, swerve or something.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
That's kind of terrifying. And that's what today's deep dive is all about.
Okay.
Like, what to do when things go wrong on the road, like big time wrong, big rig style. We're cracking open a guide for CDL drivers, which, as you can imagine, means getting into the nitty-gritty of handling like serious truck crashes.
Right.
But before you think like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, I don't drive an 18-wheeler, think again. This stuff is relevant to anyone who's ever even seen a highway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at its core, emergency response, it all boils down to just thinking clearly and acting fast no matter what you're driving.
Right.
And that's what makes this guide so fascinating, I think, because it lays out all these procedures in a way that really anyone can understand and use. Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's get into it. The guide jumps right into securing the scene after an accident, which, I mean, seems obvious.
Right.
But I'm sure it's easy to forget when you're, like, frazzled after a crash. What are some things people overlook?
It's interesting you say that because you'd be surprised how often something as like simple as hazard lights just totally gets forgotten,
Oh, yeah.
which is so important. You got to think of your flashers like a beacon, like an instant, hey, something's wrong, to other drivers.
amazing.
So like creating this virtual safety zone around you and your vehicle.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Just that instant communication without even having to, like, think.
Exactly.
What else is important in those first few moments?
Well, I think a lot of people, their instinct is to get out and check on the other driver.
Yeah.
But this guide really emphasizes staying put, if at all possible,
Interesting.
at least initially, and
Yeah.
then immediately calling for help, like
Yeah.
using your cell phone or your CB radio if you've got one.
So prioritize communication over immediate action.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Is
Is that about just staying out of the way of traffic?
It's about safety. It's about making sure that you are safe. Because even if it seems like traffic has stopped, you never know when someone might come barreling around a corner.
Yeah.
Those first few minutes after a crash are chaotic, and that clear line of communication to emergency services can literally be a lifeline.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You forget how dangerous it can be near a moving vehicle at all,
Totally.
let alone like a crash site with debris and.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about how much technology has changed that, back in the day, truckers, they relied on CB radios, which,
Yeah.
let's be honest, had their limitations.
For sure.
But now with cell phones, it's incredible how quickly help can arrive.
Totally. Yeah, I can't imagine
Yeah.
not having a cell phone. Speaking of help, what happens after you make that call? Does the guide cover what to do while you're waiting?
It does. It actually goes into some basic first aid.
Okay.
But, and this is really important to remember, this is not a substitute for professional medical care. It's really about just stabilizing the situation until the paramedics get there.
Right. It's like first do no harm, basically.
Exactly.
What are some of the things they emphasize?
Well, one thing, and this might seem obvious, but I think in the heat of the moment, people forget, don't move someone who is seriously injured. Unless you absolutely have to, unless their life depends on it. You can make their injuries so much worse without realizing it.
Yeah. That's a good reminder. I think sometimes you just want to jump into action.
Totally.
But that's not always the right thing.
And if there's heavy bleeding, applying pressure to the wound is crucial. It sounds really basic, but knowing where to apply that pressure, how much pressure to apply,
Right.
can totally be the difference.
Right.
And then finally, keeping the injured person warm can help prevent shock. And that's something that, you might not think about right away, but it's really important.
Right. So even small actions can make a huge difference in those critical moments.
Absolutely.
So we've covered securing the scene, calling for help, basic first aid. What else is in this guide?
Well, this is where I think it gets really interesting
Okay.
and a little fiery.
Okay, fiery how?
Yeah.
Are we actually talking about truck fires?
Yeah. They're more common than you might think. And you know what? It's not always like the Hollywood version, like the big crash boom explosion.
Really? What else causes these fires? I always picture those tanker trucks carrying gasoline or whatever, and then they get hit, and then it's all over.
Yeah, well, those are definitely a risk for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But this guide actually gets into a ton of different causes. Did you know that something as seemingly minor as underinflated tires can cause a fire?
Underinflated tires. I mean, how does that even happen to those big rigs? Don't they have systems?
You do. A lot of modern trucks have tire pressure monitoring systems, TPMS they call it.
Okay.
And it'll give the driver a warning if a tire is low. But even with those systems, things can get missed. You know, you're driving for hours on end,
Right.
maybe multiple days in a row.
Right.
Easy to get complacent, dismiss a warning light, maybe a sensor malfunctions.
Right. I see your point.
Yeah.
Long hauls can wear on you.
For sure.
But how do underinflated tires, I mean, how does that cause a fire?
So when a tire is underinflated, it's got more surface area touching the road, right?
Sure.
Creates more friction.
Right.
Friction equals heat. And if it gets hot enough, boom, tire fire,
Wow.
which can then obviously spread to the rest of the truck.
Yeah, that's crazy. And here I am, like, feeling very responsible for checking my tire pressure before a road trip.
Right.
What other, like, unexpected fire hazards does this thing mention?
Another one that kind of surprised me was electrical issues. Like we're talking like frayed wires, loose connections, even something like a faulty battery.
Right.
And because trucks have such complex electrical systems, you know, there's just a lot of points of failure.
So many things that could go wrong.
Exactly.
They're like whack-a-mole with electrical problems.
Basically.
How do they even troubleshoot that?
But that's where those pre-trip inspections come in. Like they really hammer that home in this guide.
Right.
Being proactive. Like actually getting out there looking for anything that seems off, wires that are looking kind of worn, connections that don't seem quite right,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. And even with like the best inspections in the world, problems can still pop up when you're on the road.
Right, of course. What can drivers even do about that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
The guide talks about doing regular checks of your gauges and your mirrors.
Okay.
And not just for blind spots, but like literally looking at the back of the truck to see if you see any signs of smoke or anything weird going on back there.
Interesting.
Just constantly being vigilant, catching those little problems before they blow up into big ones.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right. Or a whole fire truck in this case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about cargo, though? Can that cause fires, too?
Absolutely. We talked about flammable liquids, but like even stuff that you wouldn't think of as dangerous
Right.
could be a problem if it's not loaded correctly or secured properly.
Okay.
Things like hay, even textiles, certain types of electronics, all that stuff can ignite if it gets too hot or if the ventilation in the trailer is bad.
Wow, I never would have thought about any of that. Like, seriously.
Yeah, it's like that whole other layer of awareness that most of us never even have to consider. And that's like the big takeaway for me is that these truck drivers, they're carrying a lot of responsibility.
Yeah,
They're not just thinking about their own safety, but like literally everyone else on the road too.
that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So we've talked about preventing fires, but what if the worst happens? What if a fire actually breaks out? What should a driver do?
This is where it gets really interesting. The first step, and this might seem a little counterintuitive, is getting off the road, but not just anywhere.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued.
Yeah.
What's so important about where you park a burning truck?
Think about it. Your gut instinct might be to like pull into a service station, right? Like get some help.
Right. Seems logical.
But those places are basically giant fuel depots.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Not exactly where you want to be when you're dealing with a fire.
It makes sense now that you say it, but yeah, that would not have been my first thought, I don't think. Okay, so no service stations. Got it. Where should they go? Like, what if they can't get to a rest stop or something?
Yeah, so the guide really emphasizes finding somewhere away from anything flammable. Like if you can get away from buildings, trees, even other cars.
Right.
Just anything that could catch fire, too.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all about minimizing the damage.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've pulled over to a safe spot. What? Now, is it time for the fire extinguisher?
You'd think so, right? But there's actually something else they want you to do first, like before you even touch the extinguisher.
Really? What is it?
Containment. Basically making sure the fire can't spread any further.
Okay, so like closing windows and doors, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And here's something I thought was interesting. They specifically mention keeping the cargo doors closed,
Oh, wow.
especially if you're hauling hazardous materials. Apparently, opening those doors can create like a sudden rush of oxygen
Oh, no.
that can actually make the fire way worse.
Yikes. Okay, so containment first.
Yeah.
Got it. But like eventually you do have to put the fire out right.
Right. But even then, there's more to it than just grabbing your extinguisher and going nuts.
Wait, are you telling me there's like different kinds of fire extinguishers? I thought fire was fire.
Right. You're not the only one. Most people have no idea. So, like, remember how we talked about electrical fires being a risk?
Yeah.
So those need a Class BC extinguisher, which is specifically for electrical equipment and flammable liquids.
Oh, okay.
But if you've got a fire that's like wood or paper or cloth, the kind of stuff you'd find in the cab or even some types of cargo, you'd need a Class ABC extinguisher.
Okay.
And like using water on an electrical fire, that's a recipe for disaster.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So much for that bucket of water I keep meaning to put in my car.
Right.
This is why I love these deep dives. Honestly, so many things I just never even think about.
It's amazing what you don't realize you don't know, right?
Exactly. Okay, so you've got the right extinguisher. You're a safe distance away.
Yeah.
What's the technique? Aim at the base of the flames?
You got it. Hit the source.
Yeah.
Not just the flames themselves. And pro tip, position yourself upwind if you can, so the wind blows the extinguisher away from you.
Right. I'd rather not extinguish myself in the process.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've emptied the extinguisher. The flames are out. The smoke's clearing. You get, right? Like, time to relax a little.
Not so fast. This guide actually ends on kind of a dark note.
Oh.
They say just because the fire looks out doesn't mean it can't reignite.
Oh, wow.
Like there might be embers hidden somewhere, or the heat itself could be enough to reignite something.
So even when you think you've got it under control, you still have to be careful.
Exactly. You can never let your guard down completely.
Wow. This whole deep dive has been such an eye-opener. Honestly, I had no idea. There was so much to know about truck safety and, just staying safe on the road in general.
Right. It just goes to show you knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And in this case, it could save your life.
That's a good point. Even if you're never going to drive a truck, this stuff is still good to know.
Totally. Everyone should know the basics of safety and prevention.
I completely agree. Well, to all our listeners out there, thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. We hope you learned something new today.
Yeah, and stay safe out there.
Stay safe.